All right, guys, happy Saturday, happy game day, and welcome into the Alabama pregame show brought to you by Medical Properties Trust. He's Matt Scalisi. I'm Simone Eli. We are rolling right through the month of November, guys, the second to last week of the college football season, if you can believe it already. What is it, November 20th? It's just crazy. I feel like it's flown by, Matt. It's cold outside, legitimately cold outside. Last night I was at a high school football game. I got a hot chocolate. I mean, it is wintry, it feels like, in Alabama right now.
For sure. This is this is Big Ten weather. This is the time of year that we struggle a little bit in this part of the country. I definitely can remember coming home from some Auburn games, some Alabama Auburn Iron Bowl games, and what used to be the traditional pre-Iron Bowl game, which was the Bama LSU game.
Sure.
And not doing well, like full on getting colds from being out in this. But we'll see. I think it is supposed to be really nice weather in Tuscaloosa today, despite the cold.
We will see 2:30 kickoff for the Tide, the CBS game of the week, SEC CBS game of the week, as 21st ranked Arkansas comes to town to Bryant-Denny Stadium, second ranked Alabama. When you come off of last week's game, Matt, which was scheduled to be a tune-up for the Tide, we've seen this as in years lately for Alabama, having kind of a this tune-up game late in the season prior to finishing out the SEC schedule. That was the case last week in New Mexico State. An easy win for the Tide, not so easy when you look at the injury situation, Matt, coming off of that game.
Yeah, pretty rough day for Alabama, and we'll see what the ultimate consequences are. But they lose JoJo Earle early in that game, who goes down on a punt return, and thankfully not as bad as we initially feared when we saw that happen during the game. Saban says he thinks he'll be out 2 to 3 weeks, which means there's even a possibility that he could be back for the SEC championship game if Alabama does their job and gets there. But the tougher blow really was losing Roydell Williams at a spot where Alabama was already having some depth issues. Yeah. You now are down to 2 healthy scholarship running backs. You've got, obviously, the stalwart Brian Robinson, who's had a fantastic season so far. Yeah. But behind him, Trey Sanders is the only healthy guy on that roster. And even Trey Sanders, I think had a really nice week last week, but it remains to be seen if he still kind of has that special extra gear that we saw him have before his really tough injury a year ago. So we'll see. Today is going to be a big opportunity for Trey Sanders. It may be a big opportunity also for some of these other guys that Nick Saban says they've been trying out at running back to try and add some depth. There has been, some guys converted from other positions in a sort of emergency situation. He also mentioned that they've been playing Slade Bolden at running back some as well. Yeah. So I think we might see some creativity out of the running back position today for Alabama. But above all else, I think that whole situation just puts more pressure on Bryce Young to have to kind of handle things on his own and make things happen for this offense.
Yeah, as we know, there's a lot more to the running back position than just carrying the ball. Obviously, pass protection, just making your quarterback feel comfortable there in the backfield. Not that Bryce doesn't feel comfortable now 12 weeks into the season, but let's not forget this is his first year starting, and so we will see what things look like. I also saw the Slade Bolden thing. It will be interesting to see if he is actually in the backfield toting the rock. Could happen. All right, guys, 2:30 kickoff today. For just tuning in, this is the Alabama pregame show brought to you by Medical Properties Trust. The second-ranked Tide hosts 21st-ranked Arkansas. We're going to talk a little bit about the college football playoff ranking. Alabama still at number 2. We'll talk about that, what things look like moving forward. At the end of the day, Alabama can secure a spot in the SEC championship game today with a win over Arkansas. And this is not the type of team that has been a challenge for Alabama as of late. Found this stat that Bama has outscored Arkansas 252 to 80 in the last 5 meetings. I mean, typically in years past, recently, you look at Arkansas and it's like, okay, this is definitely one of the lower caliber SEC programs, but things are a little bit different now. I'm not saying they're going to come in and upset Alabama or anything like that, Matt, but if you pull up the stats and you look at what Arkansas has done, this is nothing to just kind of scoff at. And what they have done, they have had a couple big wins throughout the season, had a couple letdowns, at least in their minds, but I'm not going to say Arkansas is back, but they're not necessarily the doormat of the SEC either.
I mean, that's a pretty impressive offensive output in the SEC. I mean, especially in the SEC West, Arkansas has played a really difficult schedule this year, and they've managed to put up some really good numbers. I think defensively has been kind of a struggle for them, and it's understandable because they've played some really good teams on that side of the ball. But you go and look at the close games that Arkansas has been in late and not managed to pull off. This team is actually, first off, I think most folks in Fayetteville will tell you they feel really good about this season overall. They feel like this is a season where they've made progress as a program, and they really think they're headed in the right direction. But you look at how many games they very narrowly lost. This is only a few plays away from being a generational season for Arkansas. So this is a team that's kind of been right on the fringe of being really, really good, and they just haven't been on the winning side of enough of those this season. But I would say still overall a much improved Arkansas team over what we're used to seeing for those of us in this state.
So Arkansas coming off of a very close win over LSU last week in overtime. Prior to that, a win over Mississippi State. Arkansas Pine Bluff obviously lost to Auburn, but Arkansas has been, like you said, like a lot of fans are happy with this season. They're 7-3, 3-3 in the SEC. I don't think anyone really expected Sam Pittman to come in and do what they have done. A big part of that success has been guys like KJ Jefferson. They're, like you said, their offense, if you can see those stats right there. At the end of the day, what Arkansas can really do is run the ball. They actually rank 6th in the country at 233 yards per game. So, Matt, we have not seen the Alabama defense necessarily have a letdown, in my opinion. I mean, I feel as though that is the one side of the ball where we have seen some consistency with the Tide throughout. In the close game against LSU, it felt like they stood tall when necessary down the stretch. But I think that today could be not a test, but an opportunity for the Alabama defense to show, okay, this late in the year, we can stand tall in the SEC going into an SEC title game, going into a postseason run.
I think it's particularly important because of if you look at the competition ahead of them. I think you look at an Auburn team that has lost their quarterback and really has not been a dominant team throwing the ball down the field this year, but they do have some really talented running backs, even though they've struggled getting those guys going. That's going to be a thing in the Iron Bowl. You're going to have to be able to stop the run. If you can do that, you're probably going to be able to beat Auburn. Georgia, again, not an explosive offensive football team. They have been a very dependable, reliable, ground-based offense. They also have a quarterback that can run the ball really well, which is another thing Alabama's going to see today. So it is kind of an interesting test for potentially the next two opponents for Alabama to go out there today and be able to show, hey, you can't just line it up and run it into the teeth of our defense. I think being able to show that the progress they've made over the season is not a fluke. It is something they can sustain down the stretch. That's going to be a big signal that they can send and force these next two opponents, I think, to try and game plan differently for them.
No doubt about that. So kickoff again at 2:30 for those asking. It's the SEC on CBS game of the week. Alabama at home against Arkansas. Again, not a game that in years past we've really looked at very deeply. We didn't really think twice about Arkansas for a while there, but Arkansas having a pretty good season right now. So Alabama second in the college football playoff rankings. The Tide stay at number 2 behind Georgia. Matt, you were talking a second ago about what the next few weeks looks like for Alabama, but this is truly the difference maker in the season. I mean, you're remembered in November, as Nick Saban and a lot of coaches say. Arkansas, the Iron Bowl, matchup with Georgia. What do you feel like the next 3 weeks could look like realistically for Alabama? Let's just say the Tide get it done against Arkansas today, against Auburn next week. And you go into the SEC title game. I don't want to talk a bunch of hypotheticals. I know Saban hates that, but it's what we get paid to do. We're allowed to do it. If they go into that Georgia game and lose, is Bama going to a bowl game? Or are they going to the playoffs?
I think that's a really interesting question right now that's not entirely within Alabama's control. The thing that is in their control is making the playoffs by winning out.
Sure.
I think you beat Arkansas and Auburn, and then you go and beat Georgia in the SEC championship. There's no discussion about it. Not only are you in, you're the number one seed. The other side of that is, I think if you lose either of these next two regular season games is a real big blow, and I think potentially knocks Alabama pretty far back. But if you lose a close fought game in the SEC championship game, I was talking about this. I would have told you a few weeks ago, 2-loss Alabama has no shot at making the playoffs. Mm-hmm. I'm a little bit less certain of that now, and I think it's partly because some of the other teams have fallen away a little bit, and they've stumbled down the stretch. I think we're at a point now where really if one of those other contenders for those remaining spots loses another game, I think a 2-loss Alabama team with a competitive game against Georgia in the SEC championship, I think that's going to look like a really attractive candidate. So, if you're one of those fans who likes to watch the whole scope of everything, watch Oregon for the next few weeks, watch Ohio State. And they both have really difficult schedules, actually. Oregon is the underdog today playing against Utah. So if either of those two teams loses before the end of the season, I think it creates an opportunity for Alabama. Now, look, like you said, Nick Saban and those players are not talking about losing to Georgia. The fans don't want to hear about losing to Georgia, but I think there's a lot on the table here, and I think that there are some story twists and turns here that may not have happened yet. So it may not be as simple a story as it looks like right now, but the way that it would be the simplest is if Alabama just continues to win. It's a very easy story.
I agree with you, Matt. In the years past, it's almost as if, okay, you have that record and you have 2 losses. There's just no chance. You don't have an opportunity to be in the playoffs. Usually we've never seen a 2-loss team be in the playoffs before, but the landscape and the atmosphere of college football this season is that nobody is really emerging outside of Georgia as like this huge national contending team who's just going to go dominate and run the table. And at the end of the day, the committee looks at, okay, who's going to bring in money? Who's going to bring in fan base? Alabama's going to check all those boxes. If it's close with somebody else, a 2-loss tied team, if they were to lose at Georgia, would be in my opinion. I mean, judging by the next 2 weeks, let's not get ahead of ourselves. But let's look around the rest of college football today and what things look like. Michigan State, Ohio State could definitely have some type of impact on what college football, what the rankings look like. Michigan is at Maryland. Cincinnati, I mean, it's weird that we're even talking about Cincinnati, is hosting SMU. Quickly want to look into the SEC, Matt, what the rest of college football looks like today throughout the SEC. A lot of teams kind of in that what we used to see for a lot of like Alabama and Auburn is kind of having that off week this week prior to the last week of the season. But outside of this one here in Tuscaloosa, Florida, Missouri, Auburn at South Carolina, Vandy, Ole Miss, and that's pretty much it in terms of SEC matchups.
Yeah, I mean, I think the big one to look for today for if you're an Alabama fan around the league, it's that Auburn-South Carolina game. I don't know that we're going to learn a ton from it because South Carolina is not a great team, frankly. They lost to Missouri a week ago, which is, really disappointing and surprising for them. Yeah. I will say this, though. Auburn is in a perilous situation. They're having to come into this game playing a quarterback that I think they had all sort of accepted was not going to be the guy this year. Sure. And on top of all of that, you face a situation where South Carolina is at home at night. That fan base gets up for those situations. They beat Auburn there a year ago, and they have to win one more game to get bowl eligible. So they have to either beat Auburn today or they have to beat Clemson a week from now. Yeah. And they're both, frankly, I think that fan base can smell blood a little bit. I think they feel like they can win either of those games if things go well for them. South Carolina needs a lot of stuff to go their way, but obviously how Auburn performs today, will have a big impact on their attitude and their mentality coming into the Iron Bowl next week.
That game, a 6 o'clock kickoff in Columbia, will be fun to watch. Right after this one here, 2:30 CBS, Arkansas at Alabama. The Tide are 20.5-point favorites over the Razorbacks at home. Matt, before we let everybody go, just in your opinion, what does Alabama want to walk away with today? What is the biggest factor here that the Tide want to see going into this Iron Bowl game that Auburn's kind of just playing for pride? Alabama is playing for a lot more than that.
I think probably the biggest thing that we haven't seen Alabama accomplish for most of this season is getting off to a fast start offensively. We have seen their offense operating well, being explosive, scoring lots of points, moving the ball well, but they tend to take a few drives to get going, and that's going to be dangerous against a team like Auburn on the road, and it's going to be dangerous against Georgia. So today, I think, is a good opportunity for this Alabama offense to show they can come right out of the gate swinging. They can be explosive early in a game. They haven't done it yet this year, and I think it'll be interesting to see if they're capable of doing that today against Arkansas.
Yeah. So 2:30 kickoff. Appreciate all of your comments this morning. A lot to look forward to. Alabama and Arkansas, not typically in years past a game that we'd really be circling on the schedule, not necessarily are today necessarily, but still something to keep your eye on. This is almost a top 20 matchup. Arkansas ranked 21st in the country. So the Tide with a huge opportunity today, 2:30 kickoff at Bryant-Denny Stadium. If you're heading to the game, bundle up. Could be a little chilly. Beautiful at 2:30, but by the time the game is ending, as we know, it gets dark at 3:30 nowadays. So you might want to bundle up, y'all. But have a great time out there at Bryant-Denny. Auburn kicks off at 6 o'clock. That's a game to watch as well. Thanks so much for tuning into the Alabama Pregame Show, brought to you by Medical Properties Trust. For Matt Scalisi, I'm Simone Eli. We will see you guys on the postgame show.
Medical Properties Trust, at the very heart of healthcare.